2 hours before the divorce, Marcus thinks the hardest part will be the judge's gavel. Then the ground shakes. Outside the courthouse, a line of black bulletproof SUVs screeches to a stop, engines growling like wild animals. People pull out their phones as the doors open in perfect, soldier-like rhythm. Elena steps out, the wife Marcus thought was broke, now in a sharp gray suit that shines in the fading light. Her hair is twisted like a crown. Her eyes are cold and unreadable. Behind her, men and women in dark suits move like trained guards, every step too precise to be ordinary. Marcus's chest tightens. This isn't the woman who packed lunches and cut grocery coupons. This is someone with power, money, and dangerous secrets. The convoy closes around her as she walks inside. The air feels heavy, like the second before a lightning strike. Whatever she is about to say will not just end their marriage. It will break the life Marcus thought he knew. And one question pounds in his head. What secret could turn a simple divorce into the most dangerous moment of his life? Welcome back, my family and friends. I've missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking with me. Your love and support truly mean the world. Creating these stories takes hours of writing, research, and editing. So if you're enjoying this, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, like the video, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep bringing you powerful and meaningful stories you won't want to miss. Now let's continue. Marcus stumbled back from the window, his mind racing through 3 years of memories, searching for clues he might have missed. Elena Rodriguez-Chen had been working at the Riverside Community Center when they met, teaching ESL classes to immigrant families. She'd lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and always insisted on splitting dinner checks because, "I pay my own way." He'd found her independence attractive then, refreshing even. Most of the women in his social circle were either climbing corporate ladders or married to men climbing them for them. But Elena had seemed content with her simple life, passionate about helping others, unconcerned with material things. Or so he'd thought. Marcus sank back into his chair as fragments of conversations came flooding back. Elena's occasional phone calls in Spanish that would end abruptly when he entered the room. The way she'd deflect questions about her family back in Colombia, always changing the subject with a laugh and a kiss. Her refusal to let him pay for a fancy honeymoon, insisting they keep things simple and meaningful. "Mr. Chen," the receptionist's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Your attorney, Mr. Jameson, is ready to see you." Marcus nodded but didn't move. Through the office windows, he could see more black vehicles arriving. A news van had pulled up across the street, and a reporter was setting up for what looked like a live broadcast. His phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. "Marcus, what the hell is going on downtown? Jenny just called me from the coffee shop saying there's some kind of celebrity or politician at the courthouse." She said. "It's Elena," Marcus interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence on the other end. Then, "Elena? You're Elena? What do you mean?" "I mean, my wife just showed up for our divorce hearing in a convoy of SUVs with what looks like a team of lawyers and advisors. She's dressed like she owns half the city, and there are reporters outside." "That's impossible. Elena works at the community center. She drives that beat-up Honda. She clips coupons, for Christ's sake." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering how Elena had always been careful with money, but not in the way of someone who was broke. More like someone who was disciplined, someone who had been taught to value things properly. "Mr. Chen," the receptionist looked concerned. "Are you all right?" He forced himself to stand. "Yeah, I'll be right there." But as he walked toward his attorney's office, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Elena stepping out of that SUV. The woman he'd married had been beautiful, yes, but in an understated way. She'd worn minimal makeup, chosen comfort over fashion, and always seemed slightly out of place at his work functions or networking events. The woman he'd just seen commanded attention without trying. She'd moved like someone accustomed to having doors opened for her, decisions deferred to her, respect given automatically. His attorney, Robert Jameson, was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and the patience of someone who'd handled hundreds of divorces. He looked up as Marcus entered, concerned about creasing his features. "Marcus, I have to ask, did you know your wife has retained Blackstone, Morrison & Associates?" Marcus blinked. Blackstone was the most expensive law firm in the state. They handled Fortune 500 companies, high-profile criminal cases, and politicians. A consultation with them cost more than most people made in a week. "That's impossible. Elena can't afford." She's also requested that the hearing be moved to Judge Harrison's chambers instead of the standard family courtroom. Judge Harrison handles more complex cases. Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Complex how? Before Jameson could answer, his assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Something she'd never done before. Mr. Jameson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Chen's legal team is here. They're requesting an immediate conference with you and Mr. Chen before the hearing. Legal team? Marcus stood up. How many lawyers does she have? The assistant looked bewildered. Sir, there are 6 attorneys downstairs, plus what appears to be a financial advisor and someone from the State Department. State Department? Marcus's voice cracked. Jameson was already reaching for his phone. Marcus, I think we need to postpone this hearing. I need time to understand what we're dealing with here. But Marcus was already moving toward the door. No, I need to see her. I need to talk to Elena right now. Marcus, wait. But he was already in the hallway, heading for the elevator. His mind was reeling with questions, but one thought kept pushing through the chaos. How could he have lived with someone for 3 years and not known who she really was? The elevator seemed to take forever, and with each floor that passed, Marcus found himself remembering more details that suddenly seemed significant. Elena's perfect Spanish, not just fluent but refined, educated. The way she could discuss international politics with surprising depth. Her ease with technology, languages, and complex concepts. He'd attributed it to her college education and natural intelligence. But what if there was more to it? The elevator doors opened to reveal the building's marble lobby, now filled with people in expensive suits. Conversations were happening in hushed, urgent tones. Several people wore earpieces, and Marcus noticed the bulge of concealed weapons under more than one jacket. And there, in the center of it all, stood Elena. She was speaking quietly with an older man whose bearing screamed military or government. When she saw Marcus emerge from the elevator, she said something to the man, who nodded and stepped back. For the first time in 6 months, Marcus and Elena were face to face. Hello, Marcus, she said softly. Her voice was the same, but everything else about her seemed different. Confidence. Powerful. Almost regal. Elena, what? Who are all these people? She studied his face for a long moment, and he saw something that looked like sadness flicker in her eyes. People I should have introduced you to a long time ago, she said. But I was hoping I'd never have to. What secrets do you think Elena has been hiding, and why do you think she kept them from Marcus? Drop your thoughts below. Sometimes love means protecting someone from a truth they're not ready to handle. I need to speak with you privately, Elena said, her voice carrying an authority Marcus had never heard before. She turned to the distinguished older man beside her. General Morrison, could you give us a moment? General? Marcus's mind reeled. Since when did Elena know generals? The man nodded curtly. 5 minutes, ma'am. Then we need to brief you on the Seoul situation. Seoul situation? Marcus watched the general step away, speaking quietly into his earpiece, and felt like he'd fallen into someone else's life. Elena gestured toward a small conference room off the lobby. Please. Marcus followed her, acutely aware of the eyes watching them. Inside the room, Elena closed the door and, for the first time since stepping out of that SUV, her composure cracked slightly. I never wanted you to find out like this, she began, but Marcus cut her off. Find out what? Elena, what the hell is going on? Who are these people? Why is there a general calling you, ma'am? And why do you look like you could buy this entire building? Elena moved to the window, her back to him. Because I could. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. What? She turned around, and Marcus saw the woman he'd fallen in love with warring with this stranger in expensive clothes. My name isn't Elena Rodriguez, she said quietly. It's Elena Isabella Rodriguez Vesquez de Montemayor. And I'm not just someone who teaches ESL classes at a community center. Marcus sank into a chair. Then who are you? I'm the daughter of President Carlos Rodriguez Vesquez of Colombia. And as of 6 months ago, when my father's health began declining, I'm also the primary advisor to his administration and the presumptive heir to the Rodriguez Vesquez Foundation, which manages approximately $12 billion in international development projects. The room spun around Marcus. $12 billion. President's daughter. He thought he might be sick. That's impossible, he whispered. We've been married for 3 years. I would have known. Someone would have said something. The media knows me as Elena Rodriguez, the private citizen who chose to live quietly in the United States while pursuing humanitarian work. My security detail has been watching from a distance. My father's political opponents have been trying to find ways to use me against him for years, so we've worked very hard to keep my American life separate. Marcus stared at her. Security detail? The reason I could walk alone at night, Marcus. The reason I was never worried about safety. Why I always seemed to know when to avoid certain areas of the city. There have been people watching over me since the day I arrived in this country. Everything was crashing down around him. Every assumption, every memory, every fight they'd had about money and ambition and her lack of drive suddenly looked different. The community center job, he managed to ask. Real. I genuinely wanted to help people, and it gave me cover for my actual work. But Marcus, she moved closer, and he could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The consulting projects I've been helping with? The reason I was always on my laptop at night? I've been coordinating refugee resettlement programs across 3 countries, managing educational initiatives for displaced children, and serving as a liaison between the Colombian government and several international aid organizations. Marcus felt like he was drowning. Why didn't you tell me? Because I fell in love with a man who saw me as Elena, not as a political asset or a connection to power or money. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Her voice cracked. For the first time in my life, someone loved me for who I was, not what I represented. But I didn't love you for who you were, Marcus said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. I loved you for who I thought you were. And then I started resenting you for not being more than that. Elena's composure finally broke, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Every time you complained about our small apartment, every time you suggested I should want more from life, every time you looked disappointed when I was content with simple things. It broke my heart a little more, because I was already living beneath my means by choice, and you were asking me to want the very things I was trying to escape. The conference room door opened, and the general stepped in. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we have a situation. The Seoul negotiations have broken down, and President Kim is requesting direct communication with your father. Since he's in surgery, they're asking for you. Elena wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, transforming back into the woman Marcus had seen stepping out of the SUV. Patch me through on the secure line, she said, and have Ambassador Chin standing by. Ambassador Chin? Marcus looked up. Any relation to? Your father, Elena said softly. Marcus, your father isn't just a retired businessman. He's been serving as an unofficial diplomatic liaison between the US and several Asian governments for the past decade. How do you think we met? It wasn't a coincidence that I was at that conference where you were presenting. Your father suggested I attend because he thought we might connect. The room spun faster. His father, who he'd thought was disappointed in his modest consulting business, had been working in international diplomacy and had essentially arranged for him to meet the woman who was now his almost ex-wife? Elena moved toward the door, then paused. Marcus, the divorce papers you're carrying? I need you to know something. 6 months ago, when I filed them, it wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I couldn't stand watching you slowly grow to resent the woman you thought you married. I couldn't keep pretending to be less than I was, and I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes when you looked at our life. She opened the door, then looked back one more time. The hearing is in 1 hour. If you sign those papers, I'll respect your decision. But Marcus, if you want to know who your wife really is, if you want to see the life we could have built together if we'd been honest with each other from the beginning, then maybe it's time we stopped pretending to be people we're not. She left him alone in the conference room, with the sound of urgent conversations in multiple languages echoing from the lobby, the weight of divorce papers in his jacket, and the stunning realization that everything he'd thought he knew about his life had been carefully constructed fiction. And in exactly 57 minutes, he was going to have to choose between the comfortable lie of his assumptions and the terrifying truth of possibilities he'd never imagined. If you discovered your partner had been hiding a major secret to protect your relationship, would you feel betrayed or grateful? What would you do? Share your thoughts. Sometimes the biggest revelations come right before we think it's too late. Marcus sat alone in the conference room for exactly 3 minutes before his phone exploded with calls. David, his mother, his business partner, even his college roommate from 15 years ago. The first text message made his blood run cold. Dude, turn on channel 7. Your wife is on the news. With trembling fingers, Marcus pulled up the live stream on his phone. There was Elena, his Elena, standing in front of the law office building, speaking fluent Korean to what appeared to be a very important man on a video call. The cheer-in at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking. Colombian Presidential Advisor mediates international crisis from downtown law office." Presidential Advisor Elena Rodriguez Vázquez is currently facilitating emergency talks between South Korean President Kim and acting Colombian President Martinez regarding the stalled trade negotiations that have threatened to destabilize markets across 3 continents, the reporter was saying. Marcus's hands shook as he watched his wife, the woman who clipped coupons and drove a beat-up Honda, casually resolved an international crisis while standing on a sidewalk. His phone buzzed with another call. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize. "Marcus? It's your father." "Dad." Marcus's voice cracked. "Where are you? People are saying you're some kind of ambassador." A long pause. "Son, I'm in Seoul. And I'm watching my daughter-in-law save a trade deal that affects millions of jobs. We need to talk. Everyone needs to talk, apparently." "Dad, did you know? About Elena? I knew she was special. I knew she was the daughter of a very important man. And I knew she loved you enough to give up a life of privilege to be with you." His father's voice was gentle but firm. "What I didn't know was that you'd be too blind to see what a gift that was." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in stunned silence. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Elena's assistant, when had Elena gotten an assistant, peered into the room. "Mr. Chin? Mrs. Rodriguez Vázquez asked me to give you this." She handed him a tablet and a cup of coffee. "She thought you might want to understand what she does." Marcus took the tablet with numb fingers. The screen showed a presentation titled, "The Rodriguez Vázquez Foundation, 3 Years of Impact." As he scrolled through, his coffee grew cold in his hands. Water purification systems for 200,000 people in rural Colombia. Educational programs that had put 50,000 children in school. Microfinance initiatives that had created 15,000 small businesses. Medical clinics serving 300,000 patients annually. And in the corner of every photo, every project report, every impact statement was a small credit. Project Coordination. E. Rodriguez, North American Division. Elena had been doing all of this while he complained about her lack of ambition. The tablet showed more recent projects. Refugee resettlement programs she'd been coordinating from their kitchen table. Late-night video calls he'd assumed were social were actually emergency consultations with disaster relief teams. The ESL classes had been covered for training sessions with new immigrants who were actually political refugees. Marcus scrolled to a section titled Personal Sacrifices for Security Protocols and felt his heart stop. There were photos he'd never seen before. Elena at state dinners in elegant gowns, standing next to world leaders. Elena giving speeches to the United Nations. Elena received an humanitarian award from the European Union. The woman in those photos was confident, radiant, and powerful. But as Marcus looked closer, he realized something that made his chest ache. In every single photo, Elena looked somehow incomplete. Like she was performing a role rather than living her life. Then he found a folder marked Personal MC. Inside were dozens of photos he recognized. Their wedding day, their honeymoon, quiet dinners at home, lazy Sunday mornings. In these pictures, Elena's smile was different, genuine, unguarded, full of joy. At the bottom of the folder was a document dated 6 months ago. A resignation letter. "Dear Papa," it began in Spanish with an English translation below. "I am writing to formally request permission to step back from all foundation duties and governmental advisory roles. I have found something more valuable than influence or power. I have found a man who loves me for who I am when I am simply Elena. I want to build a small, quiet life with him, even if it means giving up everything else." The letter was never sent. Marcus could see the draft watermark across every page. Why hadn't she sent it? His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Marcus, whatever you did to piss off your wife, fix it. The news is saying she just prevented a war. A literal war. Meanwhile, you're getting divorced because she wasn't ambitious enough? Are you insane?" Another text, this one from his mother. "Your father just called me from Seoul. Apparently, your wife is some kind of international superhero and you're too stupid to appreciate her. Fix this, Marcus, or I'll disown you myself." Marcus set down the tablet and walked to the window. Outside, Elena was finishing her call with the Korean president. Even from 3 floors up, he could see the moment she transitioned back from international diplomat to the woman he'd married. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she looked up at the building, directly at the window where he stood. For a moment, they looked at each other across the distance. Then Elena turned back to her team, and Marcus watched her transform once again into someone who could command the attention of world leaders. The conference room door opened behind him. Mr. Chun. It was Robert Jameson, his attorney, and the man looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. I've been in conference with Mrs. Rodriguez-Vasquez's legal team. I need to inform you that they've presented us with some complications to the divorce proceedings. What kind of complications? Well, for starters, the prenuptial agreement you signed apparently includes clauses related to international security protocols that I honestly didn't understand existed. Also, Mrs. Rodriguez-Vasquez's assets are held in trust by the Colombian government and several international organizations. Dividing them would require approval from 3 different countries and the World Bank. Marcus stared at him. We didn't sign a prenup. Jameson held up a thick document. According to this, you did. It's witnessed by a U.S. State Department official and notarized by the Colombian embassy. Your signature is right here. Marcus looked at the document. It was definitely his signature, but he had no memory of signing anything like this. Then he remembered. The day before their wedding, Elena had asked him to sign some immigration paperwork to make sure there were no issues with her residency status. She'd been crying, overwhelmed with wedding preparations, and he'd signed without reading it carefully. Mr. Chun, I have to ask, did you have any idea who you married? Before Marcus could answer, commotion erupted outside. Through the window, he could see more news vans arriving. Someone had leaked Elena's identity, and now the entire area was swarming with reporters. His phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen, but when he answered, it wasn't Elena's voice. Mr. Chun, this is Agent Sarah Martinez with the U.S. State Department. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Rodriguez-Vasquez. Due to the security situation that's developed, we're going to need to move both of you to a secure location until we can control the media exposure. A car will be outside your building in 2 minutes. Wait, what security situation? Sir, when the daughter of a sitting president appears unexpectedly in a public forum, it creates a certain vulnerabilities. We have intelligence suggesting that several groups may try to use this opportunity to send political messages. For both your safety and hers, we need to relocate you immediately. Through the window, Marcus could see Elena being surrounded by men in dark suits, moving quickly toward the building entrance. Mr. Chin? Are you there? I'm here, Marcus said, watching his wife, his powerful, mysterious, incredible wife, being escorted inside like she was exactly what she apparently was. One of the most important people in the Western Hemisphere. Sir, the car is outside. Please proceed to the lobby immediately. And Mr. Chun? Yeah. Ma'am asked me to tell you that the divorce hearing has been postponed indefinitely. Apparently, dissolving a marriage that involves state security clearances is more complicated than anyone anticipated. Marcus hung up the phone and looked at the divorce papers in his jacket. 45 minutes ago, he'd been ready to sign them without a second thought. Now, he wasn't sure he even understood what he'd be signing away. One thing was certain. The next few hours were going to change everything. Have you ever realized you completely misjudged someone close to you? How did it change your relationship? Tell us in the comments. Sometimes our biggest surprises come from the people we think we know best. The secure location turned out to be a penthouse suite at the Meridian Hotel, the kind of place Marcus had only seen in movies. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the living room was larger than their entire apartment. But what struck him most wasn't the luxury. It was how comfortable Elena seemed in it, like she belonged there. She was standing by the windows, still in that perfect gray suit, speaking quietly on a secure phone. Marcus caught fragments. Tell Papa the surgery went well. Yes, the soul situation is resolved. No, I haven't made a decision about returning to Bogota. When she hung up, the silence stretched between them like a canyon. Your father's okay? Marcus asked, surprising himself with how much he genuinely cared about the answer. Elena turned, and for the first time since this surreal day began, she looked vulnerable. He's stable. The doctors say the procedure was successful, but... She sat down on the leather sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. He wants me to come home, Marcus. To take over his role officially while he recovers. Home means Colombia. Home means a life I walked away from to be with you. She looked up at him. A life I was ready to give up permanently if you'd wanted me to. Marcus sat down across from her, the weight of the day's revelations crushing down on him. The resignation letter. Why didn't you send it? Elena's eyes widened slightly. You saw that. Your assistant gave me a tablet with your work. Elena, you were willing to give up $12 billion and a position advising world leaders to stay married to a guy who runs a small consulting business and complained that you weren't ambitious enough. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to know something funny? Every time you pushed me to want more from life, every time you suggested I was settling for less than I could have, I died a little inside. Because I had already chosen less, Marcus. I chose you over everything else, and you couldn't see that it was actually choosing more. The words hit him like a physical blow. But then, Elena continued, you started staying late at the office more often. You started talking about expansion, about networking with better clients, about the kind of life we should be living. And I realized you weren't falling in love with me. You were falling out of love with the woman you thought I was. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. I was an idiot. No, Elena said softly. You were a man who married someone under false pretenses. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Why didn't you? Elena was quiet for a long moment, then walked to a briefcase Marcus hadn't noticed before. She opened it and pulled out a thick folder. Because of this. She handed him the folder. Inside were background reports, financial investigations, and what looked like psychological profiles. All with his name on them. What is this? Standard security clearance for anyone who gets close to me. The moment we started dating seriously, my security team ran a complete background check on you, your family, your friends, your financial history, your college roommates, everyone you'd ever worked with. Marcus flipped through pages of information about himself that was more detailed than anything he could have compiled. This is invasive, thorough, necessary. Elena sat back down. Marcus, the man I fell in love with, was someone who'd built his business on integrity, who turned down lucrative contracts because he didn't believe in the client's ethics, who spent his own money helping that family from Guatemala navigate the immigration system. You were good, Marcus. Genuinely good. She pointed to a section in the file. But the report also showed that you'd grown up feeling like you were never quite successful enough, never quite measuring up to what you thought your parents expected. You dated women who were ambitious and driven, and those relationships had ended badly because you'd felt inadequate. Marcus's stomach dropped. So you decided to pretend to be less than you were? I decided to be myself without the complications of power and wealth. The Elena who fell in love with you wasn't pretending, Marcus. She was the woman I am when I don't have to carry the weight of a country's expectations. Elena stood up and walked to a window. But somewhere along the way, you started needing me to be more impressive to other people. You wanted me to network at your business functions, to dress differently, to want the kind of life that would reflect well on your success. And I realized that you weren't falling in love with the real me either. You just wanted a different version of fake. The words stung because they were true. Marcus thought about the fights they'd had, the way he'd started measuring their relationship against other couples who seemed more successful. The growing resentment he'd felt about Elena's contentment with their simple life. The night I decided to file for divorce, Elena continued, you came home from that networking event and told me I should consider going back to school for business, maybe get into corporate consulting like you. You said I was wasting my potential at the community center. Marcus remembered that conversation. He'd thought he was being supportive. Elena, that same day, I'd spent 14 hours coordinating emergency relief for earthquake victims in Peru. I'd spoken with 3 world leaders, approved funding for 6 new schools, and prevented a diplomatic incident between 2 countries I can't even name publicly. And when I got home, the man I loved told me I was wasting my potential teaching English to immigrants. The silence that followed was devastating. Marcus looked at the security file again, seeing details about his life that painted a picture of a man who'd never felt quite good enough. You studied me like a case file. I fell in love with you despite what the file said, not because of it. Elena's voice was gentle now. The Marcus Chun in that report was insecure, ambitious in ways that sometimes compromised his values, and had a pattern of relationships that failed because he couldn't accept being loved for who he actually was. But the Marcus Chun I married was funny, passionate about helping people, and made me feel like I could just be Elena for the first time in my life. She walked back to him and sat down, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn since they'd met. The question is, she said softly, which Marcus Chun am I getting divorced from in an hour? The man who fell in love with a community center worker, or the man who needs his wife to be impressive enough to validate his success? Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The expensive suit, the perfect hair, the confidence that came from managing billion-dollar budgets and international crises. But underneath it all, she was still Elena. The woman who cried during sad movies, who made him laugh until his stomach hurt, who always remembered exactly how he liked his coffee. "There's something else," Elena said, reaching into her briefcase again. "Something I need you to see before you make your decision." She handed him another document. This one was addressed to the President of Colombia, dated 3 days ago. "Papa, I am formally submitting my resignation from all government positions and foundation roles, effective immediately. I have realized that my heart belongs in America, with my husband, and I am prepared to renounce my inheritance and advisory positions to build a life based on love rather than duty. However, this decision is contingent on whether my marriage can be salvaged. If Marcus signs the divorce papers, I will return to Bogota and accept the responsibilities I was born to carry. But if there is any chance that we can rebuild what we've lost, I choose love over power, every single time." Marcus stared at the letter, his hands shaking. "You were going to give up everything." "Again, I was going to give up everything that doesn't matter to choose the one thing that does." Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at it and her face went pale. "What is it?" "The divorce hearing. Judge Harrison is demanding it proceed as scheduled, despite the security complications. Marcus, we have 30 minutes to decide whether we're going to sign those papers or what?" Elena looked at him with eyes full of hope and terror. "Or whether we're going to start over, with the truth this time. All of it. What would you choose? Love with complications or a clean break from a relationship built on secrets? Sometimes the hardest decisions are between two different kinds of truth. Share your thoughts below." Marcus was still processing Elena's ultimatum when the sweet, secure phone rang. Elena answered with the practiced efficiency he was beginning to recognize as her diplomat voice. "Yes." "What do you mean intercepted?" Her face went ashen. "How many?" Marcus watched as his wife transformed before his eyes into someone he'd never seen. Not confident or composed, but genuinely afraid. "Understood. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately." She hung up and turned to Marcus, her hands trembling. "We need to leave. Now." "What's happening?" Colombian intelligence intercepted communications, suggesting that 3 separate groups are planning to use my public appearance here as an opportunity. One wants to kidnap me for ransom, another wants to use me to send a political message to my father, and the third. She grabbed her briefcase. The third group includes people who would prefer that the next Colombian president not be someone who's been compromised by American influences. The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. They want to kill you. They want to eliminate a political problem before it becomes bigger. Elena was moving through the suite, gathering items with military precision. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. By being here, by being married to me, you're now a target too. They'll either use you to get to me, or eliminate you as evidence of my divided loyalties." Marcus felt the room spinning. "This is insane. This morning I was getting divorced, and now people want to kill me because my wife is basically Colombian royalty. Not royalty. Worse." Elena paused in her packing. "I'm a political threat with international connections and access to resources that could destabilize several governments. Marcus, the work I've been doing here isn't just humanitarian aid. I've been building networks, establishing relationships, creating systems that could be used to completely reshape South American politics when I return to Colombia." "When will you return?" "I thought you wanted to stay here." Elena's face crumpled. "That was before this morning. Before I realized that loving you might get you killed." The secure phone rang again. This time, Elena put it on speaker. "Ma'am, this is Agent Martinez. We've identified at least 12 hostile operatives in the downtown area. We need to move you to a federal facility immediately." "What about my husband?" "Ma'am, with respect, Mr. Chin is not a protected person under our current protocols. We can offer him witness protection, but—" "No." Elena's voice was steel. "Either we protect him as a package deal, or I'll handle my own security." A pause. "Ma'am, we can't guarantee Mr. Chen's safety if he remains connected to you. Our recommendation is immediate separation and relocation to different facilities." Marcus watched Elena's face as the words sank in. The government was asking her to choose between his safety and staying together. "How long?" Elena asked quietly. Minimum 6 months, ma'am. Possibly longer, depending on the political situation in Colombia and whether your father recovers enough to resume his duties. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, Marcus saw a woman making an impossible choice. Marcus, she said, her voice breaking, I need you to sign the divorce papers. What? If we're not married, you're not a target. If we're divorced, they have no reason to hurt you. You can go back to your life, your business, your safety. Marcus stared at her. You're asking me to divorce you to save my life? I'm begging you to divorce me to save your life. Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. Marcus, I love you too much to watch you die because of who I am. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the phone. Ma'am, we have movement on the ground floor. We need a decision now. Elena grabbed the divorce papers from Marcus's jacket and thrust them at him, along with a pen. Please, sign them. Let me know that at least one person I love will be safe. Marcus looked at the papers, then at Elena, the woman who had given up a life of unimaginable privilege to be with him, who had been willing to give up everything again to stay with him, who was now asking him to leave her so that she could protect him. What happens to you? He asked. I'm going back to Colombia. I became who I was always supposed to be. I marry whoever serves the political interests of the country, and I spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight for love instead of always choosing duty. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and went even paler. Marcus, they found our apartment. Someone called in a bomb threat at your office. They're not just targeting us, they're targeting everything connected to us. The weight of it crashed down on him. David, his employees, his mother. Everyone he cared about was now at risk because he'd married a woman whose life was a geopolitical minefield. Sign the papers, Elena whispered. Please, let me at least save you. Marcus took the pen, his hand shaking. The irony was devastating. This morning, he'd been ready to sign these same papers because he'd thought Elena wasn't enough for him. Now he was being asked to sign them because he wasn't enough for her world. Agent Martinez, Elena called out. Prepare 2 separate extraction vehicles. Mr. Chin will need witness protection until the threats are neutralized. Copy that, ma'am. Elena turned back to Marcus, and he saw the exact moment when she shifted from the woman who loved him to the diplomat who was trained to make impossible decisions. After you sign, she said, her voice steady despite the tears, you won't be able to contact me. For your safety and mine. This has to be a complete separation. Marcus looked at the signature line on the divorce papers. Everything he'd thought he'd wanted was right there. Freedom from a marriage that had become complicated beyond his understanding. A return to the simple life he'd convinced himself he preferred. But as he raised the pen, one thought cut through all the fear and confusion. What if Elena was wrong? What if there was a third option that none of them had considered? Elena, he said slowly. What if I don't want to be safe? She looked at him in confusion. What? What if I don't want witness protection, and I don't want to go back to my old life, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering, what if? He set down the pen. What if I want to stay married to you and figure out how to make this work? Marcus, you don't understand. People are trying to kill us. People are trying to kill you anyway. Whether I'm here or not. Whether we're married or not. Marcus stood up, surprising himself with how calm he felt. The only difference is whether you face it alone or whether we face it together. Elena stared at him. You could die. Elena, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. But at least if I die as your husband, it'll be because I was fighting for something that mattered instead of running away from it. The phone crackled again. Ma'am, we have hostiles in the stairwell. We need to move now. Elena looked at Marcus, then at the unsigned divorce papers, then back at Marcus. Are you absolutely sure? Marcus took her hand. I've never been sure of anything in my life. But I'd rather be uncertain with you than safe without you. For the first time since stepping out of that SUV, Elena smiled, the real smile he'd fallen in love with. Then we better run, she said. When faced with impossible choices, do you believe love is worth the risk? Sometimes the greatest courage is deciding to fight for something instead of running from it. What would you do? Let us know in the comments. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the hotel's stairwell as Marcus and Elena pressed themselves against the emergency exit door. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through Elena's earpiece. Package 1 and Package 2, we have a clear route through the parking garage, but you need to move in 30 seconds. Marcus looked at his wife, he reminded himself, and signed divorce papers and all. and saw something he'd never seen before. Not the composed diplomat or the community center worker, or even the terrified woman from 5 minutes ago. He saw Elena making the same choice he'd just made, to fight instead of run. Agent Martinez. Elena spoke into her earpiece with new authority. Change of plans. We're not running anymore. Ma'am, that's not advisable. I said change of plans. Elena pulled out her phone and speed-dialed a number. General Morrison? It's Elena. I need you to patch me through to Papa immediately. Yes, I know he's in recovery. Wake him up. Marcus stared at her. Elena, what are you doing? Something I should have done 3 years ago. She squeezed his hand. I'm choosing both. I'm not giving up my life with you, and I'm not running from my responsibilities anymore. The phone connected. Papa, it's Elena. Listen to me carefully. Elena switched to rapid Spanish, but Marcus caught enough to understand. She was telling her father about the threats, about Marcus, about her decision to stay in America, but not as a private citizen anymore. She was proposing something that made the old man's voice rise, even though the phone was static. See, Papa. I'm certain. Marcus is not a liability, he's an asset. And if Colombian intelligence can't protect one American businessman, then maybe we need to reconsider who we're working with. She hung up and immediately dialed another number. Ambassador Chin? Elena looked at Marcus with eyes that sparkled with something between mischief and determination. It's Elena. Your son and I need to discuss some career changes with you. How quickly can you get to Washington? Marcus felt the ground shifting under his feet again, but this time in a good way. Elena ended the call and turned to him. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Okay, how do you feel about a job that involves international travel, diplomatic immunity, a salary that starts at about $400,000 a year, and the possibility that occasionally people might try to kill us? Marcus blinked. What kind of job? The United States is about to announce a new position, Special Envoy for Inter-American Development and Security. It's a joint appointment that requires someone with business experience, humanitarian connections, and a very specific set of international relationships. Elena's smile was becoming dangerous. It also requires someone who's married to a person with the security clearance to coordinate between multiple governments. The implications were staggering. You're offering me a job working with you? I'm offering you a job working with me, for both our governments, doing the kind of work that actually changes people's lives on a massive scale. Elena's voice was gaining strength. Marcus, remember those small consulting projects you always talked about wanting to expand? What if instead of helping local businesses optimize their supply chains, you were helping coordinate supply chains that feed millions of people? What if instead of networking with regional business leaders, you were building relationships with the kinds of people who can prevent wars? Marcus felt something igniting in his chest, excitement, purpose, possibility. But the people trying to kill us will be considerably less interested in us if we're working for both governments instead of representing a potential security risk. Elena pulled up something on her phone. Marcus, the reason these groups targeted me today wasn't just because I'm the president's daughter. It was because I represent an unknown variable, someone with power but no official accountability. But if we're both official envoys, with full diplomatic status and joint security details from 2 countries, we become too important to kill and too protected to reach. Exactly. Agent Martinez's voice cut through their conversation. Ma'am, we have confirmation that one hostile group has been neutralized, but we still have unknowns in the area. Elena spoke into her earpiece. Agent Martinez, please inform your supervisors that Special Envoy Rodriguez Vasquez and Special Envoy Chin will be requiring updated security protocols effective immediately. Ma'am, I don't understand. You will in about 10 minutes. Elena grinned at Marcus. Assuming my husband accepts his new job. Marcus looked at the unsigned divorce papers still clutched in his hand, then at Elena, then at the chaos that had become his life in the space of 6 hours. Elena, this morning I thought I was married to someone who lacked ambition. Now you're telling me I could be married to someone who helps run international relations between 2 countries. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And people will occasionally try to kill us? That's possible. And we'll be traveling constantly, working together, making decisions that affect millions of people? Yes. Marcus tore up the divorce papers and let the pieces fall to the floor. When do I start? Elena launched herself into his arms, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Not because life was simple or safe, but because it was theirs. Agent Martinez, Elena called out, her arms still around Marcus. Please inform headquarters that the packages are staying together. And we're going to need a very different kind of exit strategy. What kind, ma'am? Elena looked at Marcus, her eyes shining with the kind of joy that comes from finally being able to be completely honest. The kind that ends with a new beginning. Through Elena's earpiece, they could hear Agent Martinez conferring with his supervisors. Then, "Ma'am, we've just received confirmation from both the State Department and the Colombian Embassy. Congratulations to you and your husband on your new appointments. Your security detail will be significantly upgraded." Marcus kissed his wife, his partner, his co-envoy, his adventure, and realized that everything he'd thought he wanted had been infinitely smaller than what was actually possible. "Elena," he whispered against her lips, "I love you. All of you. The community center worker and the presidential advisor, and whoever else you turn out to be." "Good," she whispered back, "because you haven't even met the version of me that gets to work alongside the man she loves. Have you ever discovered that your biggest problem was actually thinking too small about what was possible? Sometimes the life we're afraid to want is exactly the life we're meant to live. What's your take? Share below." 6 hours later, Marcus stood in the Oval Office, still wearing his morning clothes but now sporting a diplomatic security pin that apparently made him one of the most protected people in the Western Hemisphere. The President of the United States was shaking his hand while Elena translated for her father, who had been flown in from Bogota the moment the doctors cleared him for travel. "Mr. Chun," President Williams was saying, "I have to admit, when Ambassador Chun recommended you for this position 3 years ago, I thought he was just being a proud father. But after reviewing your work and seeing how you've handled today's complications, I think we may have found exactly what we were looking for." Marcus looked at Elena, who was grinning as she finished translating for President Rodriguez Vasquez. 3 years ago? His father, who had somehow materialized from Seoul in the past 4 hours, chuckled. "Son, did you really think it was a coincidence that Elena was at that conference? Or that she happened to live in your neighborhood? Or that she took a job at the exact community center where you volunteered?" The room spun slightly. All of you planned this?" Elena stepped forward, taking his hand. "Not the falling in love part. That was completely real, completely unexpected, and completely terrifying for everyone involved." She gestured around the room. "But the meeting? The opportunity for two people with complementary skills and backgrounds to find each other? That may have been encouraged." President Rodriguez Vasquez spoke in Spanish, and Elena translated. "Papa says that the best diplomatic marriages are the ones where both people choose each other twice, once with their hearts and once with their minds fully informed." "And today?" Marcus asked, still trying to process the scope of what had apparently been a years-long international setup. "Today you both chose each other with everything on the table," President Williams said, "which is exactly what we need for this position." Elena's phone buzzed, and she answered with her new title, Special Envoy Rodriguez Vasquez. A pause, then a smile that could have powered the White House. "Excellent. Thank you." She hung up and turned to the room. The Seoul trade negotiations have been successfully completed. The 3 hostile groups have been neutralized or detained, and as of 20 minutes ago, the Inter-American Development Council has approved the joint funding for our first project. "Which is?" Marcus asked. Elena pulled up a presentation on the room's main screen. "A comprehensive refugee resettlement and economic development program that will create 50,000 jobs across 6 countries, establish educational opportunities for displaced families, and serve as a model for international cooperation that other regions can replicate." Marcus stared at the screen. The scope was breathtaking. The kind of project that could change hundreds of thousands of lives, require coordination between dozens of organizations, and take years to implement successfully. "This is what you've been working toward," he said, understanding flooding through him. "All of it. The community center job, the small projects, even marrying me. This was always the plan." "No," Elena said firmly. "This was always the dream. The plan was for me to do this work alone, probably married to someone chosen for political advantages, managing it from a distance while representing Colombian interests." She moved closer to him, and Marcus could see tears in her eyes again, but happy ones this time. "Marrying you changed everything, Marcus. Because I realized I didn't want to save the world as a duty. I wanted to save it alongside someone I loved, someone who understood why it mattered, someone who could help me be better at it than I ever could have been alone. President Rodriguez Vasquez spoke again, and this time Elena's father addressed Marcus directly in careful English. Marcus Chin, you marry my daughter when you think she is a simple woman with small dreams. Today you choose to stay married when you discover she is a complicated woman with a dangerous life. This tells me you love Elena, not Elena's position. This is why you will be a good partner for her work and good son for her family. The formal approval from Elena's father hit Marcus harder than all the official appointments and security clearances combined. Thank you, sir. Elena's father smiled and continued. Also, your father tells me you are a stubborn man who does not give up when something is important. This is a very useful quality for a diplomat. Ambassador Chen stepped forward. Mr. President, if I may? He looked at Marcus with something that might have been pride. Son, 3 years ago, Elena and I were working on the preliminary framework for this development council. She mentioned needing someone with business experience who understood both American systems and humanitarian priorities. When I described your work, your values, your particular combination of idealism and practicality, she said you sounded like exactly the kind of person she wished she could find a partner with on projects like this. Marcus felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. So you introduced us. So I introduced you, his father confirmed. But I want to be very clear, neither of us expected you to fall in love. That was entirely your own doing, and it complicated everything considerably. Elena laughed. Papa was furious when I told him I wanted to stay in America and live like a normal person. He said I was wasting my education on romance. And I, President Williams added, was concerned that we were losing one of the most effective diplomatic minds of her generation to domestic bliss. But then, Elena continued, this morning happened. And I realized that I don't have to choose between love and purpose. I can have both, as long as I'm honest about both. President Williams stepped forward with 2 official documents. Special Envoy Elena Rodriguez Vasquez-Chin, Special Envoy Marcus Chin, you are hereby commissioned as joint representatives of the United States and Colombia for inter-American development and security. Your first assignment begins Monday with a working trip to negotiate the Guatemala Education Initiative. Marcus took his commission with hands that were surprisingly steady. Monday, Elena grinned. Welcome to diplomatic time, husband. When something needs to happen, it happens quickly. As they were preparing to leave, Elena pulled Marcus aside. There's one more thing. Please tell me no more revelations today. I don't think my brain can handle any more surprises. This one's good, I promise. Elena reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small velvet box. Marcus Chin, will you marry me? Again, this Saturday? With both our families present and no secrets between us. Marcus stared at the box. Are you proposing to me in the Oval Office? I'm proposing that we start over, completely honestly, with a wedding that celebrates both the people we are and the work we're going to do together. And yes, I'm doing it in the Oval Office because I'm pretty sure this is the only place dramatic enough for how our relationship works. Marcus opened the box to find not a ring, but 2 rings, matching bands engraved with coordinates. The latitude and longitude of the community center where we met, Elena explained, and the coordinates of the school we're going to build together in Guatemala, where we started and where we're going. Marcus looked around the room, at presidents and ambassadors and security agents, at his father and Elena's father, at his wife who was also his diplomatic partner and apparently always had been. Elena Rodriguez Vasquez-Chin, he said, taking out her ring. I would be honored to marry you again, honestly this time, with full knowledge of exactly how complicated and dangerous and incredible our life is going to be. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena stood on her toes and whispered in his ear. By the way, I love you for exactly the same reasons now as I did this morning, because you're kind, and you make me laugh, and you always remember how I like my coffee. Everything else is just a bonus. President Williams cleared his throat. If you 2 are finished conducting personal business in my office, we have a refugee crisis in Honduras that needs attention and about 40 reporters outside who want to know why the daughter of the Colombian president just prevented an international incident from a hotel lobby downtown. Elena and Marcus looked at each other and started laughing. Ready for this? Elena asked. Marcus squeezed her hand, looking at the woman who was his wife, his partner, his adventure, and apparently his diplomatic counterpart. I have no idea what I'm doing, he admitted. Perfect, Elena said. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. Hand in hand, They walked out to face the cameras, the questions, and the beginning of a life that was everything Marcus had never known he wanted and everything Elena had always dreamed was possible. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with isn't who you thought you were looking for. They're who you become when you're brave enough to be completely honest. What's the biggest risk you've taken for love? Share your story below. 3 months later, Marcus stood at the edge of a construction site in rural Guatemala, watching Elena negotiate with local officials in rapid Spanish while simultaneously coordinating with engineers via satellite phone. The morning sun cast everything in golden light, and he could see the skeletal framework of what would become the first school in their joint initiative, a facility that would serve 300 children and double as an adult education center in the evenings. "Senor Chen," a small voice called out in accented English. Marcus turned to see Isabella, a 7-year-old whose family had been displaced by violence 2 years ago. She ran up to him carrying a drawing, a colorful crayon picture of a building with Escuela Nueva, written across the top in careful letters. "For school?" she asked hopefully. "It's perfect," Marcus said, crouching down to her level. "Should we show Senora Elena?" Isabella nodded enthusiastically, and together they walked over to where Elena was finishing her call. When she saw the drawing, Elena's entire face lit up with the same genuine joy Marcus had fallen in love with at the community center. "Isabella, this is beautiful. Can we hang it in the construction office?" As Isabella ran off to show other children, Elena slipped her hand into Marcus's. "How are you feeling about the congressional hearing next week?" she asked. Marcus grinned, terrified and excited. "You?" "Same." Elena laughed. "Although I have to admit, testifying before Congress about our first quarterly results feels much less scary than divorce court." In 3 months, their joint program had exceeded every projection. The Guatemala school was ahead of schedule and under budget. The Refugee Resettlement Initiative had successfully relocated and provided job training for over 2,000 families. The microfinance program had funded 800 small businesses. And perhaps most importantly, their model was being studied by 4 other countries interested in similar partnerships. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Saw you on CNN again. Still can't believe my business partner is now basically a superhero diplomat. Also, Elena's security detail is way cooler than you deserve." Elena read over his shoulder and laughed. "David's just jealous that Agent Martinez taught you how to spot surveillance techniques." Speaking of which, Marcus nodded toward the edge of the construction site, where 2 men in casual clothes were doing a very poor job of looking like they belonged. "Company." Elena followed his gaze and sighed. "Probably journalists. Ever since the Washington Post article, we can't go anywhere without someone wanting to interview the couple who almost divorced before changing international diplomacy." The article had run with the headline "Love in the Time of Geopolitics," how a near divorce became a diplomatic revolution. Marcus had been mortified by the attention, but Elena had pointed out that their story was helping other people see new possibilities for how international cooperation could work. "Besides," she'd added, "if we're going to occasionally have people try to kill us for our jobs, we might as well get some good publicity out of it." Marcus was still adjusting to the idea that attempted assassination was now a professional hazard he discussed over breakfast, but he had to admit that the work was everything he'd never known he wanted. Every day brought new challenges that mattered, problems that required both business acumen and humanitarian insight, and the constant opportunity to learn something he'd never imagined needing to know. Last week, he'd spent Monday negotiating with coffee exporters in Colombia, Tuesday in video conferences with UN officials about refugee camp infrastructure, and Wednesday teaching a workshop on small business development to former gang members in El Salvador. It was exhausting, occasionally terrifying, and absolutely incredible. "Elena," he said, watching her review construction reports with the kind of focused attention that had once made him feel ignored, but now made him feel proud to be her partner. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever miss it? The simple life we had before." Elena set down her papers and looked at him thoughtfully. "You mean, do I miss clipping coupons and pretending I didn't know how to solve international supply chain problems?" "I guess yeah." Elena walked to the edge of the construction site, where they could see the village spread out below them. Children were playing in the street, women were hanging laundry, men were returning from work in the coffee fields. It looked peaceful, but Marcus had learned enough about the region to know the challenges these families faced. Limited access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities. "Marcus, do you remember our first date?" We went to that little restaurant near your office, and we talked for 4 hours about everything except what we did for work. You said you liked to help people with their problems, and I said I was in consulting. Right. And we talked about books and movies and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It absolutely does not. And I fell in love with you because you were funny and kind, and you listened like what I was saying actually mattered. Elena turned back to him. Marcus, we still have those conversations. Every morning over coffee, every night when we debrief our days. The only difference is that now when I tell you about my work, I can tell you the whole truth about why it matters. She was right. Their relationship had become more intimate, not less, since the truth had come out. They understood each other better, supported each other more effectively, and shared a sense of purpose that made even their disagreements feel productive. Also, Elena added with a mischievous smile, the simple life didn't include diplomatic immunity, first-class international travel, or the fact that our wedding registry included a personal security team. Their second wedding had been a small affair. 50 people in Elena's family's ancestral home in Bogota, with both presidents in attendance and enough security to protect a small country. Marcus's mother had cried through the entire ceremony. His father had given a speech about the courage to love beyond your understanding. And Elena had worn her grandmother's dress with a smile that could have ended wars. The best part, though, had been their first dance, not to some classical piece chosen for diplomatic appropriateness, but to the same song that had been playing at the restaurant during their first date. At that moment, surrounded by world leaders and security agents and the weight of international expectations, they'd still just been Marcus and Elena, laughing at each other's jokes and completely in love. Mr. and Mrs. Chen? One of the engineers approached with a tablet. We're ready for your final approval on the solar panel installation. Elena looked at the plans, made 2 quick modifications, and signed off. As the engineer walked away, Marcus shook his head in amazement. What? Elena asked. 6 months ago, I thought I was married to someone who wasn't ambitious enough. Now I'm married to someone who just casually redesigned a solar grid for an entire village. Marcus Chun, Elena said, stepping closer to him with the kind of smile that had made him forget his own name on their first date. You were never married to someone who wasn't ambitious enough. You were married to someone who was ambitious about things you didn't know how to see. She kissed him, soft and quick, then pulled back with eyes that sparkled with mischief. But now that you can see them, what do you think about our next project? Marcus felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. What did you have in mind? Elena pulled out her tablet and showed him a map of Central America dotted with dozens of potential sites. 15 schools, Marcus. 15 schools across 6 countries, all connected by technology and curriculum sharing, all designed to serve communities that haven't had educational opportunities in generations. The World Bank wants to fund it, 3 governments want to co-sponsor it, and the UN wants to use it as a model program. Marcus looked at the scope of what she was proposing and felt that same sense of possibility that had made him tear up the divorce papers. How long would something like this take? If we do it right, about 5 years. Marcus looked at his wife, his partner, his adventure, his favorite person to solve impossible problems with, and realized that somewhere in the past few months, he'd stopped thinking about their work as Elena's world that he was visiting and started thinking about it as the world they were building together. Elena Rodriguez Vasquez-Chen, he said, taking her hand. I love you, I love our completely insane life, and I love that I get to change the world with my best friend. Elena's smile was radiant. Is that a yes to the 15 schools? That's a yes to the 15 schools, and to whatever impossible project you think of next, and to spending the rest of our lives figuring out how to be married to each other, while also being diplomatic partners who occasionally have people try to kill them. Elena laughed. The same laugh that had made him fall in love with her at the community center, in their tiny apartment, and now on a construction site in Guatemala where they were building something that would outlast them both. Marcus? Yeah. For the record, I'm never getting divorced from you again. Even if you turn out to have more secret identities I don't know about. Marcus grinned. What if I told you I used to be really good at karaoke? Now that, Elena said, pulling him toward their car where Agent Martinez was waiting to drive them to their next meeting, would be genuinely shocking. As they drove away from the construction site, Marcus looked back at the framework of the school rising against the mountains and realized something that made him happier than any promotion or recognition ever could. He was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the right person, doing exactly the work that mattered most. and tomorrow they'd wake up and do it all again. Together. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding the perfect person. They're about finding the person who makes you want to become the best version of yourself. Have you ever been surprised by how much more you were capable of when you had the right partner beside you? Share your thoughts below, because the best adventures are always better when shared. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.